Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the Gold Silver Bitcoin Show, brought to you by GoldSilverBitcoin.com. We are more than honored to be sitting down today with Aleks Svetski. He is the founder of Ambry, host of the Wake Up podcast, and creator of the Bitcoin Times. So I'm curious, Aleks, first things first, what do you talk about on the Wake Up podcast?
Thank you, first of all, for having me on, buddy. I appreciate it. The Wake Up podcast is something I started. I remember doing one initial episode in 2019 where I dissected, Raul Powell and Dan Tapiero's initial discussion, which was done around I think it was like July or August of 2019, where they started getting back into Bitcoin, right? And I saw that. I was like, man, the way these guys are talking about it, they're going to turn into shitcoiners. And I did this whole dissection of it, and that's where it originally started. But then I got, life kind of got in the way. I got busy, etc., and I didn't do anything with it until middle of 2020 again, where we'd started living in a complete fucking clown world simulation. And the whole world had lost its mind. So I thought, okay, I need to do something with this. And it basically, the premise of the podcast is it's a hard-hitting mixture of philosophy, of discussions with smart people, Bitcoin, psychology, anthropology, biology, politics, all sorts of stuff. And it's quite broad. And we discuss what the fuck's going on in the world, look at it through the lens of first principles, look at it through, different philosophical standpoints. And yeah, we really just try and discuss multiple dimensions of life. And so I end up just tying everything back into Bitcoin in some way, shape, or form. So yeah, that's the premise of the pod.
What are the first principles that you talk about?
I guess one of my core first principles is the idea that all action and all behavior is economic in nature. So everything works on some sort of reward basis. So when you make any decision, when you perform any action, what you're doing is you're making a value judgment as to where to allocate your precious time, your energy, and whatever resources you have. And that's the core, truest, most raw definition of economics. Economics is the study of how do you take scarce time, energy, and resources and produce something of higher order value for somebody else. That's really what it is. And so for me, the ultimate first principle, I guess, is that understanding that all action starts with making value judgments. And in order to make appropriate value judgments, what you're really doing is allocating time, energy, and resources. So that's kind of, one first principle. And I try and guide, most of my life by that. Other than that, it's just sort of trying to make sense of, another important first principle is finding meaning is the meaning of life, not, pursuing happiness or, all these sorts of other things that the world tries to teach you, which I think are scams. But pursuing deep meaning and discovering meaning in situations, in circumstances, etc., is where the juice of life comes from, not from pursuing things like success or happiness or this surface level stuff, right? If you pursue meaning, all the rest sort of comes. So that's another important first principle. So I mean, there's lots of rabbit holes we can go down here, but they're all how do we live a more sound, functional life, and what are some of the core elements that can help guide us along that path?
I think some of the mistakes I made early on, of which were numerous, were, for instance, taking life like a sprint. Now, because I thought we were headed into a clown, 10 years ago or so, I thought, we're clearly headed into a clown world at some point here. I better make a bunch of money. I got to do this quick. But I've changed my perspective over the years to view life as a marathon. But of course, I want to pursue meaning. All my waking hours, essentially, obsessed with doing things that I think can contribute to the future of mankind. And more directly the people around me. So then the other thing that I've really thought through is that, when you enter into business, businessmen get a bad reputation for wanting to just get rich, essentially. And there's a lot of businessmen that are only pursuing riches. But I think there's also something deeper on a philosophical level to being an entrepreneur. And that is essentially pursuing like legacy, which I think is equated to leaving as much of a positive impact on humanity as possible. Like my question is, we talk about carbon footprints, is what's my humanity footprint? What am I putting out there? And I think that pursuit is what ultimately did lead me to Bitcoin, and likely you as well, after exploring kind of sound money. And when you don't have a sound money, all sorts of reckless behaviors are promoted. If a currency, for instance, in a particular society is being devalued, then people aren't going to want to save in it, and it's going to promote them spending. And in many cases, that manifests itself as like reckless spending, which is not sound on numerous fronts. So any thoughts on any of that?
Dude, the marathon versus sprint thing is so poignant, because I look at my life and fuck, the amount of mistakes I've made has all been from sprinting instead of like pacing. And that has cost me more than anything else. Like whether it's with, trading or in my personal life or in business, I have always pushed the envelope to the extent of blowing things up under the, under this false premise of, it has to be done now, like now. It's like really high time preference mentality, right? And honestly, I think that behavior has cost me more than anything else in my life. It's, the tendency to want to create everything now, to hit a home fucking run, to like, I mean, I've injured myself at the gym. I've like lost money on the fucking markets, like every single thing I can trace to, like that is a really, really, really powerful principle. And I just want to, highlight that and commend you for bringing that one up, because that, I mean, if I could go back and say anything to my younger self, it would be literally take your time, stop trying to fucking conquer the world tomorrow. Just compound what you're building, because if you don't fucking compound it, you're going to blow it up. And that's where I've made loads of fucking mistakes in my life. So yeah, man, I think this is, I guess, perhaps part of the disease of modernity, right? Is that, where you can't just work and save anymore. Like that facility doesn't exist anymore. So you're taught that you need to create passive income. You're taught that you need to fucking invest. You're taught that you need to trade. You're taught that you need to do all this fucking shit so that you can somehow make it in the world. And then we get, sucked into, through naivete, through wanting to do, wanting to succeed and wanting to excel, we end up creating all of this, like this fucking mess, and this wake of fucking destruction behind us in trying to prove a point that we never had to prove in the first place. It's wild, man.
Yeah, I find also that there's so much like shaming that goes on and judging, especially like in the last 18 months. Like we're in this new world order of judging and shaming. And now I think what a lot of people do is like, and this, I am including myself in this, is like judge myself. And like, if I could go back to my 18-year-old self and be like, you are going to fuck up so many times, you're not even going to be able to count them. And just don't judge yourself too hard for it, because everyone makes those mistakes. I think that would have saved me a lot of time, first of all, thinking things through, thinking things over that I have no control over because they're in the past. And just being able to, I think, also move faster in that respect, in the context of like this marathon that is life. Like, can you talk about the mistakes you've made and like the perspective they've helped you form?
Well, I mean, I'll use one example. So before I actually use the example of Amber, but I just want to make a note about Judgement. So Judgment's an interesting thing. I've kind of gone back and forth on this. Sometimes I view Judgement as as stupid, as short-sighted, etc. But then I also want to commend and appreciate the biological anthropological genesis of something like judgment, right? Is that, to survive in the world, we have evolved to basically read a book by its cover, right? And to make a quick judgment and a snap decision, because it's a very important survival skill, and it's a blend of experience and instinct. So I think judgment is a good thing. Now, that's one element of judgment. The other element of judgment is to, it's a form of like shame, which is the other form of judgment. And I guess I would argue that also has its place, because in order for one to progress and to become a better version of themselves, they must be discontented or dissatisfied with the current version of themselves. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's a very healthy thing. Is the desire for a human being to grow, to evolve, and to progress needs to have some sort of relationship to a discontentment of today. So I think, particularly when you're in your 20s and all that sort of stuff, and you judge yourself really harshly, that actually drives you to be a better achiever, to be, to be stronger, to become better, and all that sort of stuff. Particularly if you apply the appropriate meaning to it, right? Like if you apply a disempowering meaning to judging yourself, like, oh, I'm a piece of shit and I suck and, I should, deserve to die or whatever. Like, that's not very fucking empowering, and that's not going to make you a better version of yourself, right? But if you judge yourself and say, fuck, that was really dumb. I'm a fucking, I behaved like a moron. I've made a really bad decision. I need to fucking fix this so I don't do it again. That's a good form of judgment, because, the meaning that you're applying to it is that, hey, I can be better. And I'm judging these poor actions, this poor behavior, this poor version of myself, in order to become a better version of myself. So that's just kind of something I would say from a judgment perspective. But to answer your question about an example, so one easy example is I became a gold silver bug in 2010, 2011. So really early on, made a bunch of money out of it. This was, during my phase of, make money, lose money, make money, lose money. And, I was a perma bear on the market, right? Like I just sit there and fucking listen to Mike Maloney and Doug Casey and Max Kaiser and Peter Schiff and all this sort of stuff, Gerald Celente, etc. And I was convinced the world was coming to a fucking end. I was like watching, who's that dickhead who's gone ultralist, Peter something from the Zeitgeist.
Peter Joseph.
Peter Joseph, yeah, fucking, that guy's literally, suffering from Bitcoin derangement syndrome now, fucking retard. So, watching him and all this sort of stuff, and I became genuinely like a victim. But I was under this like intense pressure to like, do something quickly. And, all the money that I made in, gold and silver, like I ended up burning away on trading options and warrants and all sorts of stuff. And really all I had to do for the last, like, from the time of the GFC up until now, all I had to do was put fucking $10 a week aside into, I mean, if not Bitcoin, Amazon. Jesus Christ, I'd be a millionaire. I would have had no stress. I could have just, trained and studied and, set up, I was doing engineering at the time, but see, I dropped out of engineering. I created businesses. I did all sorts of stuff, right? I like filled my 20s with stuff. And I just need to maybe place a caveat here, is that I think that taught me a lot, and it made me grow, like, as a character. It really stretched me in all sorts of directions. But, arguably, if I was, a little bit wiser, and if I had a good mentor, maybe I could have avoided a lot of the heartache and pain that went with, the multiple directions I stretched myself into. Because, I became a quote unquote millionaire and lost everything multiple times in my 20s. Like it was ridiculous. And that level of stress, like, I mean, instead of me compounding my wealth, I made it and blew it up, made it and blew it up, made it and blew it up multiple times, just out of this, this immaturity and this high time preference kind of attitude and behavior. So yeah, I think, the trading was definitely an example. And I guess Amber is my way of, repenting for my sins, is that, I wanted to build an app, which is, hey, Mr. fucking 20-year-old, you're talented, you're smart, you're intelligent, go do something useful with your life, build something, create something, stop fucking around on the market, stop trading, just put $10 aside, or $20 aside, whatever you're going to do, just into Bitcoin every week. You will do a hell of a lot better than, trying to gamble and outcompete the fucking fiat Ponzi that that is the market today. So that's probably a good, useful example for people listening.
Yeah, I had a very similar experience. So heading into the global financial crisis, I guess I had formulated some philosophy about the world. And when that happened, I used that as evidence for that things were going to deteriorate really, really quickly. And they have not exactly improved over this time. I think poverty is just must be having increased since then. But if based on my personal situation, I thought that I was going to start feeling a lot of pressure real quick there. And I too was also a gold and silver bug at that point, and buying silver at $9 an ounce and gold at $800 an ounce. And now also expatriating to Brazil, because I was listening to a lot of people who were talking about BRIC countries and Brazil and Russia and India and China were going to do very well moving forward in the coming decade. So I essentially end up in early 2009 in Brazil.
Wow, okay.
Now with no plan, and end up teaching English. Great experience in many ways. However, one that was made based on this like notion, this idea that like things were going to crumble real quick, and I needed to kind of like get somewhere that was what I perceived as safer.
Yeah,
so here we are, like, and so then we've got that issue now. High time preference, like, got to make things happen now. Now you're looking at gold, silver, and then I enter into Bitcoin in 2012, and
nice.
the like strategies that I could have taken from that point on, the simplest of which, to buy and hodl, would have been the one in which I saw the most return. And that's not necessarily the one that I followed to any like life-changing degree. So I was a little more interested in building a business. For instance, I wanted to build GoldSilverBitcoin. I was going to put everything into that. And so now, just looking back, I think one of my main points right now is that it would have been the simplest philosophy would have been the most, I guess, life-changing. And I think that the same probably is true in the situation we find ourselves today. So fast forward to March 2020, and we enter into clown world. And because of my experience after the GFC, I remember reading banker bailouts of $1 trillion, and I'm thinking, man, that is not good. It smelled like, I thought it was like a takeover, like a real like hot one. And so then fast forward 2020, I'm a little more seasoned, a little bit more experienced, I suppose. And so we enter into clown world, and whereas some people I know who were much younger than me kind of did the same thing I did when I was in my early 20s, like they headed for the hills to like South Dakota. I knew that there was going to be like a little like time, and that I could maybe think things through and come up with like a plan about what to do, which I was pretty certain would include relocating out of California. So simplicity, and now also
more first principles there. Simplicity, the marathon. The idea of the classic principle, which they always attribute to Lincoln, which I don't think is true, but it's the idea of sharpening the axe for 9 hours and chopping for 1 hour, instead of beating at the tree for fucking 10 hours straight with a blunt axe. So it's like all of those, they're the kind of principles that we can also tie into the shit that I discuss when we do Wake Up podcast. But these are the kind of discussions that you get like in Bitcoin circles, which is for me what makes it so much more meaningful than just an avenue. Like it's not just sound money, it's not just a censorship resistant monetary network, it's entirely a fucking movement, man. And that for me is like extraordinary. And it forces you to become extraordinarily introspective and judgmental in the positive self, like maybe critical is a better word of yourself, because you can go back and look at your younger self and view the behavior, and you're like, fucking, what was I thinking? It's like I was just so fucking dumb, or so fearful, or so whatever. But yeah, dude, wild times.
Okay, so Bitcoin, you mentioned how Bitcoin in the industry or the community is introspective, and we have like such conversations. So I'm curious, can you speak to, do you think being in a risky industry has kind of maybe even sped up your like maturation via more experience quicker? I mean, you mentioned you made money and lost money in your 20s, a lot of money, and most people don't have that experience. And I think that there's a lot of like sobering lessons that one learns in those moments. Can you speak to maybe like what it was like to make millions and then lose millions for starters?
Yeah, I mean, I guess how can I put this? Like, growing up as a poor kid, right? You have these, dreams, illusions, visions, or whatever of grandeur, especially growing up in a little bit more of a Western society, right? Is the idea of success is is relatively ingrained or embedded in society. I think with particularly my dad was very hard on me, and he was quite adamant, about me becoming something. Like his vernacular, his words were like, you need to, you cannot become just another number, you need to become something. And I think that was him, projecting on his own disappointment in life of, having come from Europe, on a boat, and then, having an opportunity to build something from scratch in the promised land of Australia, not having necessarily succeeded at that, and then just really projecting that onto me and my brother in particular. So I think these sort of, these early things helped shape my perception of what it meant to be successful. And I went out there, and I guess I didn't have much of a I didn't have any good mentors when I was young, and I didn't have a good appreciation for boundaries or risks. So I would go out, and I guess on the positive side of it, not having a healthy relationship with boundaries or risk, I would do shit that other people would never fucking do, and it would result in really quick success. But because I didn't have any controls or processes in place, the wheels would inevitably fucking fall off. So for me, making and losing money in my 20s was less something that I experienced as I didn't experience it from a monetary perspective, because I didn't spend money on myself. I didn't really like, I mean, there was a time when I bought a few motorbikes and stuff like that, and I was like kind of enjoying myself a little bit, but there was never really a time where I lived lavishly and bought a bunch of expensive shit for myself. Never. Like the only thing I really spent money on was having a half decent apartment that I could fucking live in. And from a vehicle perspective, like I've never had an expensive vehicle. The most expensive vehicle I ever bought was like a used BMW M3, which was like 30 grand, right? So like other than that, like I was always quite frugal, so I never experienced it from a money perspective. But I had this like rush of on top of the world one day, fucking bottom of the fucking pile the next day, top of the world, bottom of the pile. And I guess to your initial point is like that really, I guess if anything, it stretched my character. And I guess as I've become older, like I know where like these really wide boundaries are. I've got a broader character, probably alongside a broader character comes empathy. But what I've also learned to do now is I kind of am more conscious of where the boundaries are. And as a result, I've actually tried to narrow my life. I was saying this to a friend yesterday, actually, is I try and say no to more things now than I say yes to. Like my 20s, I said fucking yes to everything. Now in my 30s, I'm like, fucking no, 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 no. I don't want to know. I'm trying to simplify. Now, like for me, it's about selective adoption. None of the like, I don't need excess. I don't need more shit. I don't need, another fucking investment plan or another fucking shit coin or another fucking business or another idea. Like I'm literally trying to cut everything out of my life, so that I can simplify it. And I think that's, possibly a result of having really had so much experience in my 20s, that maybe my 20s were probably reminiscent of someone's entire fucking life in terms of like experience packed into a decade. And most people, they start to simplify later in their lives, so maybe there's a real blessing that I've had in that sense.
Boundaries is an interesting topic, and I think it's something I've become more familiar with really in recent years. And I'm like 30, I'll be 35 soon. And
Mhm,
so
mhm,
boundaries like this is applicable to life, family,
mhm,
to family, to colleagues as well. So for instance, so I'll take the business context first. I've noticed that I'll get in a situation where I'm advising or I have a client, and very quickly your scope starts to expand. Scope
mhm,
creep, I
mhm,
think it's called.
mhm.
And so
Yep,
all of a
yep.
sudden, the client or whomever starts putting more and more and more stuff on your desk, to the point where actually there's no way you'd even be able to get any of this done or
Mhm,
done well. And so, whereas I've now begun, like, I've gotten real good at establishing boundaries in work situations, to where I'll even tell people who are like, I'm dependent upon for income, no. In
yeah.
some cases, even more than I'll tell them yes. And I find that the people, the other service providers or their own employees who don't have that ability to say no end up with so much on their desk that nothing's getting done. They're not getting anything done well. They're pulling their hair out. The culture starts to fade. The boss who doesn't is either unaware of that he's putting too much on other people's plates, and then also has no empathy when they don't get any of it done. Also starts to get grumpier, and things just start the wheels start falling off the bus.
Mhm,
And I've seen
mhm.
this happen time and time and time again. And oftentimes I was that person who was always saying yes, 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 yes. And maybe in my early 20s, I had enough energy to get more done. But as I've gotten older, I just don't have that kind of desire to do things that I don't think are going to help an organization. And that's where the ability to say no comes in, which then allows me to focus on things that I think are going to have more of a positive effect on the overall organization, and also make it a more pleasurable organization to be a part of. And then in family as well, um, there's always this comic trope, I guess, in the movies and in on television, of like family coming over and it being a
Mhm.
time of stress. And I think a lot of that comes from not having established boundaries. So like, for
Yeah.
instance, like my wife and I have formed boundaries very clearly around our own home. Like at our own home, our rules go. It's a dictatorship, the benevolent
Yes.
dictatorship, and there's
Mhm.
no other shareholders, and there's no people with a vote or a veto. And this actually surprisingly leads to a lot of stress in situations, because people don't like being told no or whatever. They feel entitled to other, they feel entitled to certain things for whatever reason. And it is surprising about how even formulating boundaries around your own home can, in many ways, cause you to have to say no a lot. And
Well,
then,
dude, one of the things I just want to say there about, like, what you said with your clients, for example, is that, you know, and you would have experienced this, is like, as soon as you start saying no to a couple things, people actually start to respect you more, because what they do is they maybe this is biological, maybe there's something there, is like they start to sense that, hey, you respect yourself more, and as such, that they end up in turn respecting you more for having the capacity to fucking say no. And that, I think, is related a lot to time preference once again, because what you're doing in essence there is you're actually respecting your time more than you were before, right? Because if you don't respect your time, what you'll do is you'll say fucking yes to everybody, and then you'll then you know basically devalue yourself in everyone else's eyes, and effectively make a slave of yourself, like metaphorically speaking. So it's such a fucking powerful lesson, man.
yeah, so there's a gentleman named John De Martini, I think, and he pops up on my
Yes.
social feeds, or has in the past. I believe he's South African, and he has a quote where essentially he says that, like, those people who failed to govern themselves will ultimately be governed by somebody else. And I
Mhm.
that's always really resonated with me. And so what does govern yourself mean? Well, it means to have like self-control. It means to I guess lead with empathy and pursue meaning and value and providing value to other people, while also not devaluing yourself. So I think now preference does play a huge role. So I'm always constantly thinking about how I can do 2 things at once, 3 things at once, 27 things at once. And usually when somebody thinks about that, you think that they're just like running around doing too much and nothing gets done, that multitasking can diminish returns. But I literally mean, like, holistically speaking, one action produces 27 different results. So what might an example of that be? So right now, your podcast, this show, I speak with companies, and let's zoom in on the marketing communications aspect of things. Usually the way that works is that there's a bunch of different pieces that are going, and they're all kind of a little separate of each other. And oftentimes there's a course correction weekly, even, where new tasks are brought up and try to be executed upon in a piecemeal, piece by piece, one at a time manner. So I try to explain to people that a more efficient approach would be to try to do as many things as at once as possible. So this show, Gold Silver Bitcoin show, the way I see this playing out is that it is a 1 hour long show. That equals 5 to 7 articles. We're going to get 10 pages of written content out of this. We're also going to get 10 to 20 clips out of this. And so then I look at it. So what can I do with all this material? Well, you've got the one long form version, which I think is appropriate. I think a lot of people want to hear in-depth conversations. And I find oftentimes, like, for a couple of reasons, I'm able to go a little in depth. For one, I don't talk about the obvious state of the world and like these obvious things at the commanding heights that everybody should see, but unfortunately don't. Now, there's people that see them and people that don't. So I guess I'm speaking to the people that see them. And we kind of go beyond that and talk about the ways we can like manage that, whether that be through taking life like a marathon, setting boundaries, talking about how one can be an entrepreneur. And then the other thing is that regardless, so we've got the Gold Silver Bitcoin show. It's a ton of content. Now we've got all this content. So from a marketing communications perspective, now you've got all your social media content. You got like 21 social media video posts. You've also got 5 to 7 articles, which can be blogs, PRs, or op-eds. And then also you've got 100 tweets at least, and dozens of Facebook, LinkedIn, and Instagram posts. And so when I'm thinking, life's a marathon, but I also want to do 27 things at once. And that this show, for instance, in the way that I would manage the content is just one example of how I with less effort can get way more done than the people who are taking a piecemeal approach. And, I speak to people about this over and over again. And I guess for various factors, either the organization isn't nimble enough and can't execute, or just people don't understand that this is far more efficient and holistic and less in stress and makes everyone happier because it's kind of just one flow. There's a lot of flow involved in that sort of vision of doing things. Also, though, they underestimate the power of social media, and social media is a controversial topic these days. A lot of people are not happy with certain actions, and then furthermore, they say that like this technology is like degrading society. I think that like all this technology is a mirror, and it's kind of just showing us who we are. And then we like blame the technology, and we say, "Oh, it's not us. It's nothing inside my heart or my mind. It's It's Twitter's fault. It's Jack Dorsey's fault." So, but with that aside, I think we're also at an opportunity here where we're able to communicate with more people faster than ever. And I think that's underrated. That change in human society is underrated. So now I think that this makes me think about the individual and the power of the individual. Perhaps I'm an individual supremacist, but I think that now the individual can more easily than ever be heard. And the way to do that is to be an individual first and foremost. Be yourself. Don't, be critical of yourself, not judgmental, if that makes sense. Any thoughts on any of that?
Yeah. So I guess, other than the pursuit of meaning in life, I guess the other meaning of life that I've, at least deciphered is this idea of becoming the best version of yourself. And to become the best version of yourself, you want to become the best individual. So the tools are agnostic, right? Like reading Viktor Frankl the other week, and there's a passage in there where this lady asks him and says, you know, how can you use the German language when you were in a concentration camp for 5 years, like, you know, and he's like, how dare you use a knife? Do you not know how many people are killed by knives every year? And you know, like the idea is like the tool is not good or evil. The tool is agnostic, and it's up to us as individuals to use tools for our benefit. And like you said, you know, blaming a tool for the derangement of society in many senses is wrong, because all it is, as you said, it's a reflection of the level of consciousness of society. In saying that, though, there is a bit of a feedback loop there of I mean, when the money's corrupt, and when appropriate value judgments are not able to be made because we don't have feedback loops, we don't have corrective feedback loops, nor do we have growth feedback loops, right? Because we don't know, like when we perform an action, when we do anything, we don't know whether it's good or bad because we have no way to measure it, because our measuring fucking stick, the money, is broken, right? So as a result, we're all scrambling and building shit for the sake of building stuff. So like we've got real problems in the world, which is motherfuckers are starving. You know, we're not good at, you know, producing food. Like we can barely feed 2 billion people, let alone 8 billion people. So like we got all this squandering of resources and everything's backwards. And innovation is viewed as, you know, some retard building, you know, another DeFi app so that people can do more gambling. Or, you know, someone built a new dick pic app, you know, that they can send photos to each other, you know, and delete them. It's like, so all sorts of things are deranged. So in some senses, what happens is the technology becomes deranged because society is deranged, and you know things get worse and worse and worse. And in that sense, you know, maybe we do end up building technologies that aren't agnostic anymore, that they are actually conducive to more you know, more enhanced versions of the clown world simulation, which, you know, for me is very dangerous. Like I've done some thinking recently about the problem of artificial intelligence, for example. And, you know, if anything, like we should be staying fucking clear from any of that stuff until we've got our own house in order, like until we've fixed our own, like until we've made our own bed and cleaned our own room. We should not be, you know, attempting to build anything sentient, because what we're going to be doing is like one of two things. We'll either pass our broken, you know, values hierarchy onto it, or if it views us and our broken capacity to, like, you know, behave like, you know, moronic monkeys, it will then logically make us obsolete, you know. So that's like a, you know, it's a really interesting space. So anyway, just on the technology front, so I 100% agree with you, and it's a very much a mirror, and we just need to basically get our shit in order. But to get our shit in order, we need to have a viable, functional, realistic way to align our behavior with natural order, and we can't do that in the absence of a functional money. Like it's literally impossible. Like everything we do today, like we go and, you know, China's a great example with these ghost cities. They'll go and build an entire fucking city. No one moves in there. And they're like, okay, we need to increase GDP. So they'll knock the whole fucking city down and build it again. Like, Jesus fucking Christ. Like that's conflating the model with reality. That's like sort of like, talk about a waste of resources, a waste of energy, a waste of time, a waste of productivity, a waste of everything, just because they just add a few more digits to their fucking balance sheet. And apparently what happened in reality didn't actually happen, because the balance sheet, you know, the model is real, but reality is not. So it's such a fucking, it's a dangerous situation in that sense. So anyway, that's sort of my rant about that. There was also something else you mentioned that I had some thinking on. Now I can't fucking remember what it was. God damn it.
I guess it was like I was talking about like doing as many things as at
Yes,
once.
that's it. Yes. That's what it was. So I 100% agree with this one as well, in the sense that I've got a theory around like, and I think you may have said the word concentric, but like concentric circles around what you're doing, which is, you know, when I look at what I'm doing with Amber, with Bitcoin Times, with Wake Up, they're all related. like I'm not doing these all sorts of divergent, you know, businesses and ideas and everything like that. They all like feed into each other. And for me, like my goal for this chapter of my life is to work, I guess, for Bitcoin in the metaphorical sense, and in the real sense is, you know, I'm stacking sats. But like my goal is to help, you know, assist in the process of, you know, humanity transitioning onto a hard money standard. And the entrepreneurial expression of that could be argued as Amber. The thinking, the philosophical manifestation of that is my writing, and the podcasting, and the Bitcoin Times, etc. So I've got these multiple angles or lines of doing the same thing. And for example, tomorrow, let's say something happens and, you know, Amber fails. You know, yes, it'll be painful, but I'm still, you know, on my journey and doing the thing that I want to do. So there's like there's a robustness to having concentric circles, and there is a time maximization because they each feed into each other. So yeah, to your point, like you don't want to do multiple disparate things. You want to do things that feed or that compound on each other, which I think is, you know, rare in the world. Most people are just fucking scattered, and particularly when you're young and stupid, right?
So what's the intersection between first principles, Bitcoin, and Amber?
Okay.
And what
Interesting
is
question.
Amber?
So
I guess let's
Amber
start
is
there.
yeah, it's a dollar cost averaging app. So enables people to acquire and accumulate Bitcoin on autopilot. So, you know, instead of trying to trade and, you know, get in and out of Bitcoin and all this sort of stuff, what you do is just set up some automations, buy me like either just, you know, traditional standard DCA, buy $10 of Bitcoin, you know, every week or whatever. Or we have some more we have some smart automations these days, like we just released the buy the shift, which is it's hilarious. So you can create a rule in the app, which is every time Peter Schiff tweets about Bitcoin, it'll buy you some Bitcoin. So I've got that rule set up. So basically, I buy $21 worth of Bitcoin every time Peter Schiff tweets about Bitcoin. It's fucking great.
That's interesting. I like that. That's you know, that it reminds me of like drinking games, you know, when you watch a show and you do a drinking game. Not that I don't think I've ever played a drinking game, and if I did, not for very long. But
Mhm.
like this is like that same principle, but actually a far more positive outcome.
Yeah, exactly. So what we're trying to do is like put dollar cost averaging on steroids, basically. Um, so yeah, so that's Amber. So I guess with first principles, you know, if we tie it back to the idea of, you know, patience and perseverance and consistency, and, you know, taking your time and simplicity. So all of those first principles, you know, Amber is a personification of that in the Bitcoin space, which is, hey, you know, Bitcoin is sound money. You want to acquire as much of this as possible before the market accurately prices it, and that, you know, market pricing process is going to take decades. So you have, you know, really a golden opportunity now to basically pick up chunks of gold off the floor whilst the rest of the world is still using seashells, right? That's the arbitrage opportunity we have, but multiplied by 100 or multiplied by a fucking 1,000 because of how much, you know, larger, more complex and more broad society is. So, you know, the you want to acquire Bitcoin, you want to move on to a sound money standard, you want to help, you know, do your part in shifting the world onto a sound money standard. You want to do it sensibly and simply, and then in that sense, Amber is a way to do that, and it kind of, you know, exists at the intersection of all of those.
What gave you the idea for Amber?
Was just, you know, me being, you know, me running around telling everybody to buy fucking Bitcoin, and then them basically looking at me strange, saying, how, where, how much do I buy? What do I do? What about Ethereum? You know, what about this shitcoin? What about that shitcoin? I was like, fucking hell, I got to build something here that kind of gives people a product where it's, you know, simple, quick, easy, and it's Bitcoin only. And yeah, it was me trying to solve a problem in the market.
I think one of my favorite products in this market, other than Amber, of course, is Lolly. And Lolly is so simple. And okay, my wife, we were married for like 3 years before I told her about Lolly, and like I told her about Bitcoin a lot. And it was kind of like now she's primed to like really like Bitcoin. She's like was raised by somebody who is very Austrian economically minded, understands gold and silver, but Bitcoin, whatever, a little abstract until I showed her Lolly, until I show her an app like Amber, where it's like so simple and clear that it's like, oh, okay, I can wrap my head around this. I don't have to think too hard, and I can dip my toe in and learn by actually being a part of this, right? So now she's got sats on Lolly. We're looking for an app like Amber actually, and to use as well. And so it's these simple, minimalistic apps that really resonate, I think, with a lot of people. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, that is during the transition, like, because here's the thing, like things like Lolly and Amber are just not going to exist when we're on a Bitcoin standard, right? Like there's no use for it. No one's going to give you fucking sats back, on a hyper Bitcoinized economy, because sats are going to be so valuable. So that exists in the moment. And the more products and services that we have during the transition phase, off the shitcoin fiat standard onto the Bitcoin standard, um the better. Like, and if they're simple enough to sort of be integrated into daily behavior, then it just makes all the more sense.
All right, I want to talk more about building a startup to make yourself obsolete, which sounds like what you're doing. But so I guess can you talk a little bit about the Bitcoin standard? Like, so you're convinced that we're in a transition, that we're heading towards a Bitcoin standard, and that essentially like via evolution, if you will, that we are going to not move to a highly centralized digital currency world managed by central banking institutions, but rather one that's far more decentralized and disparate. Can you speak to that?
So do you mean like the structure of the world, and how it
Well,
looks,
you mentioned
or?
like under a Bitcoin standard, Amber won't exist. So like you're effectively like building a startup to make yourself obsolete, right? At the end of the day. Can you
Yeah.
kind of
Well, I mean, like what I more mean is like that Amber will, maybe I should rephrase it as the current incarnation of Amber won't exist, which is a product to move from dollars to Bitcoin, right? Maybe in the future Amber acts as a Bitcoin wallet, a Lightning wallet, or some other abstracted version of of a some third, fourth, fifth layer on top of Bitcoin. Maybe that's where we kind of if what the product evolves into. So I can't see the future in that sense, but I guess on a Bitcoin standard, like the biggest thing that I see changing is that we'll normalize and find a more natural equilibrium for companies and corporates, and governance or governments will become more like service providers and no longer like overlords, right? So you become an overlord when you can fund yourself, and that's effectively what the government is today. Is like it's a mechanism for extracting wealth from the population and funding itself to then enforce more wealth extraction from the population. So it's a parasitic entity, and it can do that because it can issue the money, right? It is the legal issuer of money. Now, if you remove that capacity, and money is kind of one of the physical laws of nature of the universe, so it kind of sits in the realm of the speed of light, or like the three laws of thermodynamics. Like once it's out there, then you don't, no one can gain that unfair advantage, and no one can play a crooked game, in which case the only way to acquire more Bitcoin, the only way to progress in the game of life, whether as an individual or institution or organization or a company or whatever, is to add more value, to produce more, to create higher order substances, goods, services, products, and in doing so the world becomes far more competitive, far more fragmented. The idea of behemoth companies and behemoth nations starts to disintegrate, because you can't operate efficiently or effectively at such large scales, right? So these things start to break down against the reality that is Bitcoin, and the fact that it reintroduces economic consequence. So that's kind of the for me, what I see, I guess to paint the vision, it's like, the future of the world is one in which we have, you know, a million cities instead of 226 countries. And in those million cities, we have, a whole range of different companies. We no longer have the FANG stocks, right? We have thousands and thousands and millions of companies, really. And that's what makes the world thrive at that point.
Yeah, that kind of decentralization seems like such a no-brainer in so many ways. And there's so much fear around that concept. And I think we would have to sacrifice some sort of a certain level of utilitarianism in such a setting. But I think that, as you stated, like, there's certain things we should not be doing, like AI, because if it becomes sentient, it's going to reflect us and our broken values, or it's going to judge us and want to perhaps rule us. And so then now I think there's a Jack Johnson lyric. This is an artist that I like to listen to. He's got great positive vibes, and it's a lyric. He says, "We've gone beyond where we should have gone." And I think this is a poignant lyric, and it's something that sticks out to me. Now, as a philosophical question, like, should, as a moral imperative, like, certain things be done? Now, tell us about Bitcoin Times and some of your writing there.
So the Bitcoin Times started off as, like, I got invited to talk at this conference about blockchain, right? And I was like, for fuck's sake, these guys are retards, but whatever, I'll go and talk. And it was really funny because the prior year I got invited by them to talk about crypto and ICOs, and I basically blew up the idea of crypto as like the dumbest fucking thing possible. And that kind of ruffled some feathers, and it pissed them off, and then they didn't want to be involved with me anymore. But then they were like, a year later they called me and they're like, you know what, you were right about crypto, so can't talk about blockchain. I was like, are you fucking sure, man? Because I'm gonna do the same thing. But I was like, yeah, whatever, I'll just come. And I put together this talk, and the thing is that I only had 30 minutes on stage, and I put together enough content to freaking do I don't know, like a 4-hour talk or something like that. So I just thought, man, there's so much good content here, I can't waste it. What do I do? So I just I turned it into a publication, and it started off as just this thing that we're going to do once. And then after we did it, I got so much good feedback on it. I was like, you know what, maybe I could do this multiple times. Maybe there's something here that I can do on a biannual basis or on an annual basis. And I went ahead and started like creating a yearly publication with the best minds in the space. So edition 2 had like Breedlove, had Gigi, before they were really well known, Rory Highside, Dan Held, Connor Brown, Nick Carter, and myself. And it was an incredible publication. And it was just long form essays. And the idea is like, these are things that somebody would still get value from reading 100 years from now, and look back and kind of, in awe and shock and wonder and say, how did these guys, not only just sort of foresee that, but have the intellectual depth to really think about this in this way. So then in edition 3, I had myself, Jimmy Song, Eric Kaysen, Giacomo Zucco, Jeff Booth, and Parker Lewis. And that was, another incredible edition. That one was kind of the idea of Bitcoin as a Promethean technology, stealing back the fire, from the false gods, and, giving it to the people, kind of thing. So it was another really powerful piece, and it was, at the end of 2020, so, we were right in the middle of, Clown World simulation. And now we're about to release edition 4, which will be myself, Brandon Quidham, Thomas Strolight, Alan Farrington, and 2 other guys, Peter St. Ongi and Craig Warmke, who are both philosophers, Bitcoiners. So this one is, Bitcoin is a New Hope. And it's a bit more of a future pacing thing. And my article in there is going to be called Fire, Bitcoin Teleportation. And it's this idea of like, Bitcoin being the most important discovery since fire. And it's really just sort of pushing the envelope and pushing, the macro view of Bitcoin, and not macro in the fucking, Raoul Pal market sense, right? Fuck that. Like, that's all stupidity. Like, macro in the sense of like, what does this mean in civilizational terms, and in time frames that span millennia. Like, what does Bitcoin mean in that context? Because I believe it's the biggest thing to happen since the discovery of fire. So yeah, that's a bit about the Bitcoin times.
So we're going to wrap this up. I just wanted one last comment in there. So when I think about fire, Bitcoin as fire, a lot of people might think that's ludicrous, but really the implications of sound money that's decentralized and not controlled by any central authority is significant. And so when I imagine somebody sitting around creating the first fire, the people today who are saying Bitcoin is bad for the environment would have been sitting around that first fire and said, "No, we can't do that. That's bad for the environment." We've had the pleasure of sitting down today with Aleks Svetski. He is the founder of Ambry, host of the Wake Up podcast, and the creator of the Bitcoin Times. Thank you so much, Aleks, for joining us today.
Thank you, brother. Really appreciate it, man. This was a great conversation, man.
I appreciate you. Thank you so much. Looking forward to staying in touch. And thank you everyone for listening. Have a great day.